So, does anyone already feel like they're in the Christmas spirit already? Because I've been finding myself in a pretty difficult situation because every single time I walked around like stores, restaurants, and all these other places, there's Christmas decorations everywhere. Not even just decorations, but there's like stuff to buy. There's Christmas music in the background in stores. They already have decorations set up for themselves. Like, it's crazy. So I did the unthinkable, and I actually watched a Christmas movie last night, and it was Frosty the Snowman. It's a classic. I love that one. So I just wanted to brief about that, and honestly, if people are asking if it's too early to celebrate Christmas and listen to music and all that stuff, I would say no, man, because stores are already doing it, so why shouldn't you? What is up, everybody? My name is Logan Strong. Welcome to CTF Sharon Talks Football. Today, I am going to be giving you guys my Week 10 NFL reactions. So let's jump right into it. Before we get started, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos whenever I post. Well, out of the way, let's get started. So before we break down all these games, I do want to make one thing noted, is that every single team that played this week looked extremely sloppy. Like, you'll see a lot of close games, but that's also due to the fact that a lot of teams were making a ton of mistakes, and it was just a lot of bad play of football. So if I say one team played a good game, most of the time it's going to mean that they didn't play all that great, really, but they made it good enough to win a game or keep close to a game. I say that as the first game here is looking like both of these teams did not look like that at all, but we'll break it down. So the first game we got here is the Bengals at the Ravens during Thursday Night Football, and this was an amazing game. Both of these teams played really good football, but the Ravens came up with the win at the end. Looking at the Bengals here, Joe Burrow had an amazing game, 34 for 56, 428 passing yards, and 4 touchdowns, not a single turnover. Rushing was pretty lousy. Chase Brown was the leading rusher with 13 carries for 42 yards and a touchdown, so he did get a touchdown. And this is where it gets crazy. Receiving was led by Ja'Marr Chase with a whopping 11 receptions for 264 yards and 3 touchdowns. Tanner Hudson had a touchdown as well, but completely overshadowed by Ja'Marr Chase. He had an amazing game. Looking at the defense, they did not have a single sack or a single pick, but that's just because this game was just an offensive showdown. And then looking at the Ravens here, Lamar Jackson had another great game, 25 for 33, 290 passing yards, and 4 touchdowns. Rushing was led by Derrick Henry with 16 carries, 68 yards, and a touchdown. He had a pretty decent game. And then receiving was led by Tyron Wallens with 3 receptions, 115 yards, and a touchdown. He had a great game for himself. And then you got Mark Andrews with 6 receptions for 68 yards and a touchdown. Rashad Bateman with 6 receptions and 54 yards and a touchdown. And then Nelson Aguilar had a receiving touchdown. Also, one thing I've been seeing lately is that Zay Flowers is like on a pattern. So you've got like one bad game, and then he'll follow up with 2 really good games, and then he'll go to a bad game again. Like, it's been a pattern all year. And then looking at the Ravens defense, they had a total of 3 sacks, all 3 of them being by number 92. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that name. I would struggle. But the way the Bengals lost this game at the end is that the Bengals, after their last touchdown, tried to go for 2 to get the win, but it failed, so the Ravens won. I get why teams do that, but at the same time, I really don't, because, like, if you trust in your defense, you just go for the extra point and tie the game. Like, what are you doing going for 2? But yeah, very good Thursday night game, and Thursday nights have been pretty good so far this year, so keep it up. Next game we got is the Germany game, the New York Giants at the Carolina Panthers, and this was one of the best tank bowls I've ever watched in a long time. Close game, overtime game, and very sloppy football. The best you would want in a tank bowl. Looking at the Giants here, Daniel Jones was awful, 22 for 37, 190 yards, not a single touchdown, and 2 picks. Rushing was led by Tyrone Tracy Jr., who did have a great game, 18 carries for 103 yards and a touchdown. He was productive. And then Daniel Jones had a rushing touchdown as well. And then receiving was led by Wan'Dale Robinson with 5 receptions and 51 yards. Not a single score from any receivers. Malik Neighbors having 6 receptions for 50 yards. And then looking at the Giants defense, they are only highlighted by 1 sack, and that sack was by Brian Burns. And then now looking at the Panthers here, the legendary Bryce Young threw for 15 for 25, 126 yards, and a touchdown. Rushing was led by Chuba Hubbard with 28 carries, 153 yards, and a touchdown. I really want to know what he takes before every game because he never put up these stats. And then receiving was very lousy, but it was led by Jalen Coker with 3 receptions, 41 yards, and no touchdowns. but Jatavion Sanders did have a receiving touchdown. And then the Panthers defense was highlighted by 2 sacks and 2 interceptions on the day. You want to know how the Giants lost this game? In overtime, they won the toss, and in like the first 2 plays, they fumbled the ball. Like, seriously, New York, how am I supposed to take your team seriously? Like, you somehow play against good teams pretty well, and then you go against the Panthers, one of the worst teams in football, and you look like the worst team in football right now. Like, I'm glad you're going to get a good draft pick this year, because I just want to hear more excuses next year when you lose, but I just can't take your team seriously, man. You guys suck. Next game we got is the New England Patriots at the Chicago Bears, and this is probably one of the most embarrassing games I've ever watched from the Bears. Like, just what I said about the Giants, how am I supposed to take you guys seriously, especially with the roster you have? Like, you're expected to do at least decent, and then you go against one of the worst teams in football, and you only put up 3 points? You guys are embarrassing. Looking at the Bears here, Caleb Williams was bad, 16 for 30, 120 yards, not a single score. Rushing was led by DeAndre Swift with 16 carries, 59 yards, not a single score. He was okay. And then receiving was led by Keenan Allen with 5 receptions, 44 yards, not a single score. Like, this is all I'm getting. Shitty stats all over the board for the Bears. And then the Bears defense was highlighted by 1 sack and 1 interception. And you really got to thank Cairo Santos for kicking the 3 points that he did, because if he didn't, you guys would have ended up with a goose egg. Looking at the Patriots here, Drake May had a pretty decent game, 15 for 25, 184 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Rushing was led by Ramondre Stevenson with 20 carries, 74 yards, and not a single score. And then receiving was led by Austin Hooper with 3 receptions, 64 yards, not a single score, but Jalen Pork did have a receiving touchdown. I literally said pork. It's pork. Come on, Sharon. And then you look at the Patriots defense here. They had a total of 9 damn sacks. Like, that's one big issue about the Bears here. Like, their offensive line is absolutely garbage. If you really think about it, it was a tank bowl when it came to coaches. Like, 2 bad coaches between Gerard Mayo and Matt Eberflus. But Gerard Mayo ended up getting the win here. He outcoached Matt Eberflus. That must say something. Honestly, if it wasn't for the Bears roster that they had, I would have fired Matt Eberflus after this game, because this was an embarrassing game. Next game we got is the San Francisco 49ers at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and this game was kind of what I predicted, except I said the Niners were going to be back to their old playing ways, but nope, they still look sloppy. Looking at the Bucs here, Baker Mayfield had played an okay game, 18 for 29, 116 yards, and a touchdown. Rushing was led by Bucky Irving with 13 carries, 73 yards, and a touchdown. And then receiving was led by, weirdly, Rachaad White. 6 receptions, 39 yards, and a touchdown. Receiving was very lousy for the Bucs. Wow. And then looking at the Bucs defense, they had a highlight of 3 sacks on the day. And then looking at the field goal kicker, Chase McLaughlin, he kicked 8 points for the Bucs. Looking at the Niners here, Brock Purdy played a good game. 25 for 36, 315 passing yards, and 2 touchdowns. Rushing was a little lousy, and it was led by Christian McCaffrey with 13 carries, 39 yards. I mean, you can't expect him to be perfect after that long injury. Like, you'd be crazy if you expected him to be perfect right off the bat. And then receiving was led by Juwan Jennings with 7 receptions, 93 yards, not a single score. But Ricky Pearsall had 4 receptions, 73 yards, and a touchdown. He played himself a good game. And then George Kittle had 3 receptions for 57 yards and a touchdown. All these receivers here actually put up pretty good stats. And then looking at the Niners defense here, they were highlighted by 2 sacks on the day. And I guess you could highlight Jake Moody with kicking 11 points and the game winner. But if he wasn't so shitty, he would have made 3 other field goals, and that would have added 9 more points to that total. Like, Jake Moody sucks this year, man. He sucked his whole career. But yeah, even though it was a close game, it was a good game by the Niners. A good win for the Niners, and they will have to play the Seahawks next week, so that will be an interesting one. Next game we got is the Denver Broncos at the Kansas City Chiefs, and wow, there's a lot to talk about with this game. Looking at the stats here for the Broncos, Bo Nix actually played a great game, 22 for 30, 215 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He was very clean. And then rushing was led by Audric Estime. Who was that? 14 carries for 53 yards, not a single score. And then receiving was led by Cortland Sutton with 6 receptions, 70 yards, and a touchdown. And then Devon Vele with a touchdown as well. I think I did pretty good on that one, actually. And then when you look at the Broncos defense, they had a total of 4 sacks on the day. Looking at the Chiefs here, Patrick Mahomes played a good game, 28 for 42, 266 yards, and a touchdown. Rushing was pretty lousy, but it was led by Kareem Hunt with 14 carries and 35 yards, not a single score from any running back. And then receiving was led by also Kareem Hunt with 7 receptions and 65 yards on a single score, but Travis Kelce did get a receiving touchdown with 8 receptions and 64 yards. And then looking at the Chiefs defense here, they were highlighted by 2 sacks on the day. What made this game so crazy at the end is that the Broncos were lined up to make the game-winning field goal, and the Chiefs ended up blocking it and saving it their winning streak and saving their undefeated season. Devastating for the Broncos, but honestly, I think it's actually funny at this point. Like, I still hate the Chiefs, but I think it's just funny how they're finding weird ways to keep their very average undefeated season alive. It's just astounding to me. For the people that wanted to see that play, well, you're in luck because it actually earned the play of the week for me. So if you watch this here, the Broncos are in line for kicking the game-winning, my Week 10 play of the week. Next game we got is the Buffalo Bills at the Indianapolis Colts, and this was a very ugly but close game. Looking at Joe Flacco here, if you look at his stats, you will think he didn't do that bad, but he really did play a very bad game. 26 for 35, 272 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he threw 3 picks, all in the first half. Rushing was led by Jonathan Taylor with 21 carries, 114 yards, and no score, but he did look really good rushing. And then receiving was led by Alec Pierce with 4 receptions, 81 yards, and a touchdown. Josh Downs had 7 receptions for 72 yards, no score. And then Adonai Mitchell had 6 receptions for 71 yards and no score. And then Tyler Goodson had a receiving touchdown. And then looking at the Colts defense, they are highlighted by 2 sacks and 2 interceptions on the day. Looking at the Bills, Josh Allen did not play a pretty game. 22 for 37, 280 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 picks. Rushing was led by James Cook with 19 carries, 80 yards, and a touchdown. Josh Allen had a rushing touchdown as well. And then receiving was led by Mac Hollins with 4 receptions, 86 yards, and a touchdown. And then also Khalil Shakir had 6 receptions for 58 yards, not a single touchdown. And then looking at the Bills defense, they have a total of 4 sacks and 3 picks on the day. They were very productive. So yep, that's really what you're going to see a lot of today. Close games, but surrounded by shitty football. Next game we got is the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Washington Commanders, and this was everything I was expecting it to be. Close score, very close game. Both teams showing off their talents, but the Steelers barely coming out with the dub. Looking at the Commanders here, James Daniels played okay, 17 for 34, 202 yards, not a single touchdown. Production-wise, rushing was pretty lousy, but Austin Eckler had 13 carries, 44 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Jeremy Nicholas had a rushing touchdown as well. And then receiving was led by scary Terry McLaurin with 5 receptions, 113 yards, but not a single score. And then looking at the Commanders defense, they had a total of 3 sacks and 1 pick on the day. And then looking at the Steelers, Russell Wilson played a great game, 14 for 28, 195 yards, 3 touchdowns, only 1 pick. Rushing was led by Jaylen Warren with 14 carries, 66 yards, but Najee Harris had the rushing touchdown. And then receiving was led by George Pickens with 5 receptions, 91 yards, and a touchdown. Mike Williams had a receiving touchdown, welcome to the Steelers. And then Pat Freiermuth also had a receiving touchdown. And then the Steelers defense had a total of 3 sacks on the day. So yep, that was a very entertaining game, and I'm honestly really impressed with the Steelers this year. They look fantastic. They actually look like a contender. They actually don't look like an average team pretending to be good. Like, they actually look like convincible. Like, they look convincing, I should say. But nothing to take away from the Commanders. They also look like a very good team, but the Steelers just came up the better team on top. So great game from both of these teams. Next game we got is the Vikings at the Jaguars, and I think I hardly saw a single highlight from this game, and I could tell this game looked awful. I did know that Trevor Lawrence was out with this game. He had an injury, so Mac Jones took his place, and he did not play the best game. 14 for 22, 111 yards, and no touchdowns and 2 picks. Rushing was extremely lousy. Travis Etienne is continuing to having a terrible season. The only rushing touchdown came from Mac Jones. And then receiving was also very lousy, with the receiving leader being Evan Ingram with 6 receptions and 40 yards, not a single score from any receiver. And then the defense was highlighted by 1 sack but 3 interceptions. The Jaguars' defense was pretty productive, but they just weren't enough to take care of the Vikings. Don't think I'm going to give any praise to the Vikings because they looked awful as well. Sam Darnold having a terrible game. 24 for 38, 241 yards, no touchdowns, and 3 picks. He's starting to show his true colors. Rushing was led by Aaron Jones with 17 carries, 88 yards, not a single score. He did get hurt earlier in the game, so I hope he did not get, it's not a bad injury, because I do like watching Aaron Jones. And then receiving was led by TJ Hawkinson with 8 receptions, 72 yards, and not a single score. And then the Vikings defense was highlighted with 3 sacks and 2 interceptions on the day. And you have to give credit to the kicker for the Vikings, John Parker Romo, kicking all 12 of their points. So yeah, the Vikings came up on top, but both of these teams looked very bad this week. They looked terrible. Next game we got is the Atlanta Falcons at the Saints, and for the first time on this channel, I can say the Saints won a football game. I didn't think that was going to happen until like week 15 or 16, but it happened now, and I'm actually kind of thrilled about it. It might ruin our tank, but who knows, I just wanted the Saints to get at least one last win until we tank the rest of the season. Looking at the Falcons here, Kirk Cousins actually did not play that bad. 23 for 38, 306 yards, not a single touchdown, but had 1 pick. Even though he didn't throw a touchdown, his yards were pretty good. Rushing was led by Bijan Robinson with 20 carries, 116 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He was fantastic. And then receiving was led by Drake London with 8 receptions, 97 yards, not a single score. And then Darnell Mooney had 5 receptions for 96 yards and a single score. Also, on the topic of Darnell Mooney, how come nobody's talking about how good he's been this year? He used to be terrible the last 2 years on the Bears, and then as soon as he goes to the Falcons, he's had a very good season. I've been very impressed with Darnell Mooney this year. And then looking at the Falcons defense, they did absolutely nothing. And also, one thing to note, Younghoe Koo did kick 5 points, but he also was terrible. He missed 3 field goals that would have gotten the Vikings the win on this one. And then looking at the Saints here, Derek Carr actually played a decent game. 16 for 25, 269 yards, and 2 touchdowns, not a single turnover. Rushing was led by Alvin Kamara with 17 carries, 55 yards, not a single score. And then receiving was led by Marquez Valdes-Scantling. First game with the Saints, 3 receptions, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Also, Kamara having 5 receptions, 54 yards, not a single score there. But wow, what a game by MVS. And then looking at the defense, the Saints had 3 sacks and 1 pick, that interception being by Tyrann Mathieu. Also, you got to give credit to Blake Grupe because he kicked 8 points. Without him, the Saints did not win this game. So yep, cheers to this win, and hopefully this will be the last one we get because I really do want to get a very good draft pick. So yeah, kind of crazy to say, I actually want the Saints to tank. Next game we got is the Tennessee Titans at the Los Angeles Chargers. Looking at the Titans here, Will Levis making the start for the first time in a few weeks. 18 for 23, 175 yards, and 2 touchdowns, not a single turnover. Pretty clean game. Rushing was lousy, with the leading rusher being Tajay Spears with 7 carries, 47 yards, not a single score. And then receiving was led by Calvin Ridley with 5 receptions, 84 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He had a great game. And then looking at the Titans defense, they shockingly did nothing. And that actually kind of shocks me just because the Titans defense has always been like their strong suit this year. Looking at the Chargers here, Justin Herbert played a decent game. 14 for 18, 164 yards, and a touchdown. Rushing was led by Gus Edwards with 10 carries for 55 yards, and then 2 rushing touchdowns by both Justin Herbert and Hassan Haskins. And then receiving was led by Ladd McConkey, 2 receptions for 52 yards, the receiving touchdown by Quentin Johnson. And then looking at the Chargers defense, they had a total of 7 sacks on the day. Wow. Also, should probably give credit to Cameron Dicker, the kicker, because he kicked 9 points for the Chargers. That without him, they probably would have lost. So, yup, good game by the Chargers, and there's really not much to say just because this game was just there. The Chargers are 6-3, which is great, but again, the Titans are just there. Like, there's not much to talk about. Next game we got is the Jets and the Cardinals, and I had the Jets winning this game. Like, what the hell was wrong with me that day? Looking at the Jets here, Aaron Rodgers did not really do much. 22 for 35, 151 yards, and not a single touchdown. Rushing was led by Breece Hall with 10 carries for 52 yards. He continues to be very hit or miss this year. And then receiving was led by Garrett Wilson with only 5 receptions, 41 yards. Like, the Jets were horrible this week. And then the Jets defense only got 1 sack on the day. And then you also have to give the credit to the kicker, Spencer Schrader, kicking all of their points, all 6 of their points. Now let's look at the actual entertaining team here. Kyler Murray playing a pretty good game, 22 for 24, 266 yards, and a touchdown. Rushing was led by Trey Benson, was 10 carries, 62 yards, no score, but James Conner had a rushing touchdown, and then Kyler Murray had 2 rushing touchdowns. He was very productive on the runs this year. And then receiving was led by also James Conner, 5 receptions for 80 yards. And then Trey McBride had 4 receptions for 71 yards. Marvin Harrison Jr. had 5 receptions for 54 yards and a touchdown. And then looking at the Cardinals defense, they had a total of 2 sacks on the day. So, yep, good game by the Cardinals, and New York, you embarrassed me this week. Both teams did. Both New York teams embarrassed me this week. Next game, we got the Eagles at the Cowboys, and the Cowboys continue to find ways to embarrass themselves, and I enjoy it every single time. And no, I don't want to hear it's because Dak Prescott was out. The Cowboys would have lost this game even with Dak. Dak, even when he was healthy, was very mediocre this year. But looking at the Cowboys here, Cooper Rush was terrible, 13 for 23, 45 yards on a single score. They ended up putting in Trey Lance at the end, and he threw 1 pick. Rushing was led by Rico Dowdle with 12 carries, 53 yards, and not a single score. But that's kind of what you can expect by the Cowboys rushing squad because their running backs are terrible. And then receiving was awful. The leading receiver was Jake Ferguson with only 4 receptions and 24 yards. And then looking at the Cowboys defense, they only had a total of 2 sacks, both of them being by DeMarvion Overshown. And then you got to give credit to Brandon Aubrey because he kicks all 6 of the Cowboys' points. Without him, the Cowboys would have had a goose egg. And then looking at the Eagles here, Jalen Hurts threw for 14 for 20, 202 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 pick. Rushing was led by Saquon Barkley with 14 carries, 66 yards, and then Jalen Hurts getting 2 rushing touchdowns. And then receiving was led by A.J. Brown with 5 receptions, 109 yards. Dallas Goedert got a receiving touchdown, and Johnny Wilson got a receiving touchdown. And then looking at the Eagles defense, they had a total of 3 sacks and 1 interception, that interception being by C.J. Gardner-Johnson. So, yep, good game by the Eagles, and I will continue to say this, the Cowboys are an embarrassment this year. Next game we got is the Sunday Night Football game, the Detroit Lions at the Houston Texans, and even though this was a very close game, I do not have a lot of praise to give to these teams. Looking at the Texans here, C.J. Stroud continues to disappoint this year, 19 for 33, 222 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 picks. Rushing was led by Joe Mixon with 25 carries, 46 yards, and a touchdown. Other than that, extremely lousy. And then receiving was led by John Mitchell III with 5 receptions, 74 yards, and a touchdown. And then looking at the Texans defense, they had a total of no sacks, but 5 interceptions. Don't worry, we'll get to that. But you have to give credit to the kicker Fairbairn, who kicked 11 points for the Texans. Like, he carried that team today. And then looking at the Lions here, Jared Goff probably played one of his worst games of his career. 15 for 30, 240 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. Like, that's embarrassing. Like, that's unacceptable. Rushing was led by Jahmyr Gibbs with 19 carries, 71 yards, 0 touchdowns, but David Montgomery did get the rushing touchdown. And then receiving was led by Sam Laporta with 3 receptions, 66 yards, and a touchdown. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown had 6 receptions, 60 yards, and a touchdown. And then looking at the Lions defense, they had a total of 4 sacks and 2 picks on the day. But you have to give credit to Jake Bates here. He kicked 8 points, leading the Lions to this win, and kicked off a game-winning field goal. Like, without him, the Lions would have lost this game. So even though the Lions got the win at the end, this does not feel like a win because they looked absolutely embarrassing. Jared Goff looked terrible. If they play like this in the playoffs, they are gonna get bounced right out. So they need to get their shit together. And then the last game we've got is Monday Night Football with Miami Dolphins at the LA Rams. And wow, the Rams looked awful. Like, just god awful. Like, looking at the Rams here, Matthew Stafford did not play a good game. 32 for 46, 293 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 1 pick. Actually, I wouldn't say he played awful. He just did not play his best game. Rushing was led by Kyren Williams with 15 carries, 62 yards, and 0 touchdowns. And then receiving was led by Puka Nacua with 9 receptions, 98 yards, and no score. And then looking at the Rams defense, they had a total of 3 sacks and 1 pick. And you have to give credit to Joshua Carty, their kicker, because he kicked all 15 of the Rams' points. Like, the Rams were absolutely terrible in this game. And then looking at the Dolphins here, Tua threw for 20 for 28, 207 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 pick. Rushing was terrible, 12 carries for 37 yards by Devon Achane. And then one rushing touchdown by Malik Washington. And then receiving was led by Jalen Waddle with 3 receptions for 57 yards, not a single score, but Tyreek Hill did get the receiving touchdown. He's been very quiet this year. And then looking at the Dolphins defense, they had a total of 4 sacks and 1 pick on the day. And then you have to give credit to Jason Sanders for kicking 11 of their points. Without him, the Dolphins would have not won this game. Like, you had to give a lot of credit to a lot of these kickers this week because a lot of these teams wouldn't have done shit without them. So the Dolphins pull up with the upset, and the Rams probably played one of their most embarrassing games in a while. So the Rams need to get their shit together as well. So, yep, that's one thing you got to highlight from this week. Like, close games, but a lot of very shitty, sloppy football. Like, a lot of these teams looked really bad this week. And that was my Week 10 NFL reactions. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, don't forget to leave a comment, like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos whenever I post. With all that said, I'm Logan Sharon. I'll see you next time.